Hey, we're back, and it's resistance training time, my favorite kind of training. It's very exciting. This is where we pick things up and then put them down. Okay, so resistance exercise is specifically designed to enhance muscular strength and endurance, and it can get even more specific than that. So get excited. These are specific to body parts generally with resistance training, right? So you've got your biceps, you're working on your biceps, do curls, right? Use of free weights is pretty consistent throughout a resistance training program. And basically, you're looking at applying some sort of load to your body, right? And sometimes we think of that like rock climbing is an example of that, right? Because basically what you're doing is you're carrying the load of your own body weight, right? So that would still be considered a load-bearing activity. Okay. How does resistance training, hold on, moving my face. There I am, right? So how does resistance training work? So humans enjoy being in a state of homeostasis, right? So your temperature never really goes too far past 98.6 degrees. If it goes even a little bit above, right, if we end up getting into the like 103 range, you start to get nervous, right? I mean, I get nervous at like 100, but whatever, Purell. So we like to be in a state of homeostasis. We like to keep everything pretty much even. And we have a lot of bodily functions that make sure that that stays in place. Like I said, temperature regulation. And we'll see this more when we go into further units about things like sweating, right? That is because our body temperature, we want to keep our body temperature around 98.6 degrees. So homeostasis is really an essential part to all exercise programs because this is how our body is going to adapt to stressors. And in resistance training, your stressors are going to be weightlifting, right? And like I said, free weights, your own body weight, and we even see resistance training take the form of bands, loops, and kettlebells and stuff like that, and TRX. Cool. So your body goes through these different stages when you're training for something, right? So you've got alarm, resistance development, and then exhaustion, right? So alarm. It is alarming after your first spin class. Sometimes you can't move, right? It's your initial reaction to a stressor, and your body goes to protect itself, right? So you may be sore the next day, right? You may just otherwise feel like maybe you never want to see a bicycle again, right? And that's because your body is saying like, whoa, I don't know how I feel about that. I didn't like that, right? Because you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and your body is looking to sort of like boomerang you back to normalcy, even if that normalcy is a sedentary state, which isn't very good for you health-wise, right? But your body's used to it, so it tries to sort of snap you back. So this happens, like I said, during the initial phases of resistance training, and the body's forced to try to adapt to increased amounts of force on the bones and the joints and connective tissue, like ligaments and tendons. And also your nervous system gets involved, right? Like we learned before with reciprocal inhibition and stuff like that. Your nervous system starts to play a role. So what's important about this part too is that it says during the initial sessions of resistance training. This may also mean initial sessions of a new resistance training program, right? Where you've upped the weights or things like that. That's called progression, and we get to that later. That's 6.43 or something. Okay, so you may feel like dying during the alarm stage. You get delayed onset muscle soreness. Yay, that's how you know it's working. So this is pain, and it's like 24 to 72 hours after some sort of bout of intense exercise. And it's basically just your muscles' way of saying like, hey, I'm not accustomed to that stressor. This, by the way, can happen even if you're doing something, if you're like a bodybuilder, right? And then you decide that, one day instead of lifting weights, you're going to go do Pilates. You're going to be real sore the next day. And that's because, not necessarily because you've changed it up by lifting heavier weights, but because now you're challenging your body in a whole different way, right? In a pretzel-like way. Okay, so surprise, right? Yay for soreness, because this is how, like soreness, right? So at this point, we're uncomfortable, but we're not in excruciating pain, right? That's important to make that distinction. But this is where the magic happens, right? So now we have increased oxygen in our blood supply, and we have increased what's called neural recruitment of working muscles. So basically, your brain is saying like, all right, well, now that I'm accustomed to this new heavier weight load, right? I'm going to need more muscle fibers to sort of come in and join the fun, right? So then your brain is going to trigger more of your muscle fibers to join in to do things like a contraction or whatnot. And that's how you end up getting a larger surface area, cross-sectional surface area of your muscle fibers, which is what people who are looking to bulk up want, right? They want those like huge Thor-like arms, right? We all have our dreams. Resistance development stage. This is more magic because the body's going to increase its functional ability to adapt to the stressor, right? So now you're over that initial stage of like, oh my God, what am I doing? And you're like, okay, I've repeated this enough times. And now my body's making the proper adaptations and I feel more comfortable lifting these weights or doing these moves or whatever the case may be. So here's the kicker, right? And this will get us into progression, is this last bullet that once adaptation has occurred, the body's going to require increased stress or overload to produce a new response and a higher level of fitness. So that means that eventually those 8-pound weights that you thought were really heavy goes from being your heavy set to your light set, right? Because you keep increasing the weights if you want to continue to progress in your fitness journey, right? You could make the same analogy to something like running, right? If you do a program like a couch to 5K, right? Your body's also going to go through these different stages because you're using new muscles. Eventually, you'll be able to run for longer and longer without feeling like you're going to pass out. Exhaustion. Oh, we don't like it. Exhaustion isn't just that you're tired. Exhaustion is distress when a stressor is too much for any one of your systems, right? This is bad. And this is often what people do when they're sort of like, I made a New Year's resolution and I'm going to lose 50 pounds in 2 weeks, right? Nah, don't do that. People tend to overload themselves. They're either lifting too much too fast, or maybe they've decided they really want to commit to a new fitness program and they decide that they're going to do, lift weights every day of the week, right? Those are poor choices and it actually won't get you to your goal any faster. It'll probably set you back, right? Because this is like the best way to get an injury, right? Is to push yourself to the point of exhaustion. So this is also called overtraining, which we address in a whole separate slide. I know, feeling lucky. But we talk about like the excess frequency, volume. What do we mean by volume? What do we mean by intensity? I even said we're going to discuss this later in more detail. Look at that. But you definitely want to be aware that overtraining is a thing, and it can actually cause you to gain weight, lose muscle, and get injuries, none of which sounds like fun. All right, so that gets us through alarm and exhaustion and all of that stuff. Benefits of resistance training, right? This is definitely something that the IB is going to be all over, right? Because remember, the IB likes to do things like, it likes to ask you to do things like outline, where you give sort of a sampler platter of everything you know about the topic. Or it's going to say something like evaluate, right? Where we know that it's going to ask us about implications and disadvantages, right? So here are your big takeaways from resistance training. And this will really help you to answer those questions, right? So improved cardiovascular efficiency, that's how you end up getting more oxygen to your muscles, by the way, which we mentioned earlier. Increased bone density, right? Increased bone density gives you a great platform to say more stuff, right? Because who is concerned about their bone density? The elderly. And people used to think that weightlifting was not for the elderly, but it is. So it helps them to increase their bone density. This is particularly important for women who are more prone to osteoporosis. Okay. Your cholesterol levels go down, that's great. And then you have increased metabolism, which can help you lose weight faster, right? What do you mean increased metabolism, you crazy lady? I thought that I had to spend time on the elliptical or in spin class or doing aerobics to increase my metabolism. Yes and no. The benefits of resistance training is that you end up building muscle, right? And people get really afraid of that because they think like, oh no, I don't want to look like Thor, particularly women. First of all, women, you can't ever look like Thor because you don't have testosterone. So you could lift the same amount of weight and do the same thing, right? And you're never gonna bulk up in that way because you don't produce testosterone. But anyway, if you build muscle, right, even not a Thor-like amount of muscle, your body has to expend more energy to keep that tissue alive. So if you are 150 pounds and 5% body fat, or sorry, 15% body fat, let's say, you're going to eat like thousands, like way more than 2,000 calories a day because your body has to maintain the life of that muscle. And muscle eats more than fat and bone and whatnot. Very fascinating, I know. So physical increased tissue tensile strength. What do I mean by that? I mean you're less prone to get injured because your tendons and your ligaments and your joints are just functioning better because you're putting load on them and you're asking them to function better. And generally, when you ask your body to do something, it's like, okay, right? Unless you're asking it to do too much too fast, in which case you get overtraining, in which case you're sad. Okay, increased cross-sectional area, that's hypertrophy, that's bulking. Decreased body fat, always awesome, because body fat is just, you don't need it, right? And the more that it starts to center, particularly around the middle, the more sort of harmful it gets in terms of other diseases that can crop up. Increased neuromuscular control. You have literally better control over your muscles because your brain is used to tapping in more of them more frequently. So you're going to be a better dancer, perhaps. Increased endurance, you can dance for longer, should that be your preference. Increased strength, obviously, and increased power, because now you have muscles that work. This is very exciting. Let's see if there's more on resistance, because I can't remember. Oh, no, this will be the next video, so stay tuned. Ooh, that was long.